Now. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon at this Fabian event on reaching gender parity in Westminster. I'm Emily and I'm the Women's Officer for Fabians, and I'm really excited to be chairing this important event with Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm the Northwest Women's Officer for the Young Fabians.
So we've got an amazing lineup today on this important event, and I'll just introduce them quickly. So we've got Frances Scott, who is the founder and director of 50/50, which campaigns to achieve a gender balanced parliament. Frances launched 50/50 in late 2013, and the campaign Ask Her to Stand was launched in 2016. This has been an incredibly successful cross-party effort. For example, in 2019, in the general election, 50 of the women standing were part of 50/50 and 9 went on to win seats in the House of Commons. We also have Feryal, and Feryal Clark has been the Labour MP for Enfield North since the election last year. She serves on the Environmental Audit Committee and is also the PPS to the Shadow Housing Secretary, Thangam Debonair, and to Steve Reid, who is the Shadow Communities and Local Government Secretary. Just prior to her election, Feryal served for 14 years as a local councillor, with nearly a decade spent as a cabinet member, and for 2 years was deputy leader. We also have Sarah Owen, who has been the Labour MP for Luton North since the December election last year, and she currently serves on the Health and Social Care Committee and as PPS to Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy. And prior to her election, Sarah was a care worker, worked with the London Fire Brigade, and a political officer for the trade union GMB. We're so happy to have everyone here today, so thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. Amy and I have been really passionate about wanting to hold an event on gender representation in Westminster. We're both utterly frustrated and tired to see that men still outnumber women in Parliament. As two young women who want to work in politics in the future and maybe even stand for office, we thought this would be a really great opportunity to talk about what progress there has been made, but also what more can be done, as we all welcome the progress in gender representation, but we still remain really frustrated to see that women have to really fight to have their voices heard and be represented in policy making. So just quickly about the event, we'll be asking panellists to share some of their thoughts on the topic, and then we'll be opening up to do a Q&A session. So please do put any questions you have in the Q&A box, and then we'll come back to them later in the event. So Frances, we know that you're the expert on 50/50 and parliamentary representation, so we were just hoping you'd be able to start us off by giving us an outline of the problem and some background to your work with 50/50.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a historic systemic problem. In the last 100 years since women won the right to vote, over 5,000 MPs have been elected, but only 552 of those were women. So, you know, we're still having to battle for equal representation. And the reason this matters is that representation shapes policy, and Parliament should draw upon the widest possible pool of talent and experience, including the 32 million women. And it's also, you know, planning the future is a joint responsibility. Women need to be equally involved. We've got some massive problems facing us. Obviously, at the moment, it's COVID, the COVID crisis, and women have proven how good they are at dealing with that. But climate change is a massive problem too, and women should be very involved in seeking the solutions to that. And finally, it's also about respect, and Parliament and our democracy should be showing respect for women and our experience. And so people say, well, the change is happening. And let's face it, the Labour Party have done brilliantly. You know, 51% of your MPs are women. That's 104 Labour MPs are women. Only 87 Conservative MPs are women. 24% of the Conservative Party at the House of Commons. So they've got a long way to go. They've got to double it. So, you know, Labour is leading the way in this, which is fantastic, and you need to champion that. But at the last election, in fact, only 12 extra women were elected to the House of Commons. And at that rate, it's going to take until 2060, another 40 years. You know, I'll be dead and you wonderful young women will be old. And this is just too long. You know, we've got to do better. In 1997, 60 extra women were elected to the Commons. Well, that's what we need. So here, what we're doing at 50/50 is we've set up something called the Sign Up to Stand programme. And you're absolutely right, Emily. The wonderful thing was that at the last election in 2019, over 50 women standing were part of our Sign Up to Stand campaign. And 9 actually went on to win seats in the Commons. 6 of those extra 12 women were part of 50/50. You know, I'm really proud of that. And we would ask any woman who's interested in standing, sign up to stand with us. And then what we do is we allocate you a buddy, a kind of a friend, so that there's someone you can call a kind of companion, a political colleague, because actually peer support is essential in politics. So we allocate a buddy. And the other thing we do is we send every woman who signs up to stand with us a kind of personal political profile, which gives them some guidance about the steps to take if you want to get elected in local government or to Westminster. And the other thing that we're doing is we're running bite-sized meetings every week. I mean, one of the wonderful things about what's happened with this COVID crisis is that people are coming online, and we've managed to break the Westminster bubble. We've had 20% increase in women signing up to stand since the beginning of this year. We run Zoom events every month on the 21st of every month. We run bite-sized meetings with party political advice, expert advice about how to progress within every party. So really, I really, thank you for inviting me today. Congratulate Labour on the success and achievements that they've had in this sphere. But I would really urge any Labour women who are interested in pursuing a career in politics, please sign up to stand with us. We can monitor your progress. We can support you every step of the way. We will be pointing to the Fabian mentoring group. We will be pointing to Labour Women's Network. We will be forming little bubbles. We call ourselves the New Girls Network. And it's a cross-party initiative, women supporting women to get to Westminster. So thanks for inviting me.
Answers. That was great, a great plea. I'm feeling a bit, I don't know about Amy, might get a bit of sign up here. Feryal, what about you? What about your thoughts on the importance of gender equality in Parliament and your own experiences?
Thank you, Amy. Well, I think as with any issue of diversity, there are a lot of structural issues that need to be addressed. And these apply to every level of political office and professions outside. I would argue that childcare in Parliament, which has a disproportionate effect on women, is a big issue. Let's not forget there was a huge fight I have read in Parliament just to get a nursery. There was a big push to keep it as the Bellamy's bar. So, and the antisocial hours of voting can be prohibitive. Debates and votes can still go on till like very early hours. And it's important to emphasize that while we still tend to have, whilst childcare still has disproportionate impacts on women, it does also impact on all parents as well. I think the upfront costs of elections and running an election campaign, not to mention the time that you have to take off work, is a major issue. I was in a WhatsApp group with lots of PPCs leading up to the election. And that was a huge problem for a lot of women who had to take time off work and some who had to give up work. So there's a huge financial burden on candidates and women who want to stand. To some extent, the Labour Party movement and the trade unions can help some candidates. I mean, I ran in, I ran for a seat in 2013, first time I ran Fenfield North. It was hugely expensive. I had to borrow lots of money. I didn't have trade union support at the time. I had to borrow money from friends. So it can be really, really exclusionary. So you need, you know, the finance is a massive issue. But it's also, so the trade union support and the other financial support you get, it's not true for, so we Labour Party, you know, that funding, that resource is available to Labour Party candidates when they're standing, but it isn't the case for other parties, I would say. So finances are a huge part of excluding women, I would say. So it just ends up being people you can afford it who enter Parliament in most of the other parties. There's also the issue of good candidates self-excluding. So mentoring is really important, but also actively looking for good women and candidates and asking them to consider standing. And that's why I think the Ask Her to Stand campaign was really well phrased. It was a fantastic campaign, really, really credit to everyone that was involved in that. It's a brilliant campaign. I think the Tories have managed, they use this approach, they've used that approach to encourage more, to get more BAME candidates to stand for Tory seats. In the past one decade, last 10 years, I would say the Tories have managed to increase their representation of BAME candidates and MPs, whereby they've got successful candidates, successful people to stand in some of their seats. And I think it's something that we need to continue to do with women as well. And the Tories have failed to do that with women, but they have managed to do it with the BAME community. So Ask Her to Stand campaign is really important, and I think something that we need to continue with. I would also say that it's not just Parliament, it's every level of government. Given that most people cut their teeth, political teeth, in local government, I did, and I spent 14 years in local government. Given that is where most people gain their experience, the barriers in local government also need to be looked at. For example, it wasn't until last year that local government introduced maternity leave policy for cabinet members. So until last year, if you were a cabinet member, you would either have to continue working when you gave birth or leave your job. I mean, it's crazy that is still the case. So that needs to be looked at, considering it's where most of the 2019 intake that I know have gone through local government. So that's a really important area. I would also I would emphasise that Parliament is not just the Commons. It is the clerks, it's the Secretariat too. It is also the Lords. It wasn't until 1954, the Peerage Act 1954, that there was a female peer. So we need to, those layers are also not very representative. We need to ask people to stand, and we need to make changes there as well. So I would say we need to, finally just say, we need to do more of, Ask Her to Stand. We need to demolish the structural issues in local government, in Parliament, in House of Commons. We also need to ensure that we expand and do more of those schemes. I know Labour Women's Network do a fantastic mentoring scheme, which encourages, supports women to stand. So there are lots of good examples of what works that we need to do more of and do much quicker. I would just finally say, Emmeline Pankhurst said, you have to make more noise than anybody else. You have to make yourself more obtrusive than anybody else. You have to fill in all the papers more than anyone else. In fact, you have to be there all the time and see that they do not snow you under if you are really going to get your reform realised. So to bring about change, we have to continue to push all of these really good programmes that work, so we can actually, not as it's been said, not slowly make that change, but to speed up that change that is desperately needed. That's all from me. Thank you.
That was fantastic, thank you. Just to plug our event after this, we do have one at 5:30 on diversity and equality in local government. So we'll be joined by some amazing Labour councillors then, and we'll be talking about all of these issues. For example, I know in the build up to this, I was doing a bit of research, and only 7% of councils have maternity policies in place for councillors. 7%.
That's because it was only introduced by local government association last year. Most of them haven't adopted it because there is just no willingness, I would say, in that area.
And just one more point. I could talk about this for hours and hours, but I would so agree with you on the layers within the Commons. As someone who's worked in for 3 Labour female MPs, I think it's the diversity even within the workforce is really shocking sometimes to see. And you think that, yeah, the unsociable hours of Parliament, it doesn't just affect the MPs who are representing their constituents, it is the whole workforce that support them as well. And so the more diversity of people we can get, the better. And something really needs to be said about that as well. So thank you for bringing all of that up. Sarah, how about you?
Thank you, and thank you both for chairing this event and for inviting me. And I 100% endorse what Francis and Feryal have said around the need to get greater representation, and that's not just in Parliament, but as Feryal had said, in local government. But I would also say in the wider movement. So from my background as a trade unionist, the trade union and labour movement, we need to see greater gender equality there. And also within the political system itself. So I don't want to just ask her to stand. I want to ask her to be an advisor. I want her to be a communications officer. I want her to be the lobbyist journalists. The whole of Parliament, the whole of our political field needs to be much more diverse, and not just with gender. There is a huge question on intersectionality here. In terms of getting more Black, Asian, minority, ethnic women into positions, more working class women into positions of power as well. And I say positions of power because we are represented in lots of fields. But if you take the pandemic, for example, we have a workforce in the NHS and care workers of around 75 to 80% of which are women. Yet at the beginning of the pandemic, the messaging, everything came from men. And I've just seen this picture that's been going around Twitter, and it's got Chris Whitty looking very angry at Dominic Cummings, as I think he probably should do. And then you've got Boris Johnson, you've got Matt Hancock looking incredibly lost, and you have another man in the room. There are no women in this room. And what we've seen is that countries where they do have women on the team or are led by women have done significantly better than us. And I think we really need to say that there is, yes, we are playing our part, but it's not necessarily that we are in the positions of power that we need to be. And we need to be in those rooms first in order to get our voices heard. And it's in the right rooms as well. And I think there's lots of things that can make us very, very angry. But one thing that I keep remembering and sometimes have to remind myself is don't get mad, get organised. And that goes through anything that we're doing, whether it is trying to get more representation in Parliament, whether it's a specific campaign, whether that's about gender or not. And it's about identifying the issues, how you can win, what actually quantifies as a win, particularly while we're in opposition and we are not in power. Identifying allies. Now, and being an ally as well. Because what matters to you will probably matter to other people as well. You just need to identify who those people are. And they may be women, they might not be. You might have a male colleague who would be a perfect ally and be willing to support, but also being an ally for others and amplifying other people's campaigns. And then strategize together would be my point. And I think just even looking at the COVID situation, it's women that have lost out. in terms of, you've got care workers that are on statutory sick pay, £95 a week. You've got Boris Johnson complaining that he can't live off £150,000 a week, a year at the moment, because he can't afford a nanny. The world's smallest violin for him, I'm afraid, when you have care workers that are going out, risking their lives, risking their family's safety for something that is below a living wage quite often. And when you take what has happened and look at COVID through a gender lens, or through a working class lens, a poverty lens, or a diversity lens, generally, you will see the massive difference and the importance behind the people that are making those policies that affect our country. And just broadly, I think this is about, I want to, specific point for Labour, I think the last cohort, with the first cohort of candidates that had bursaries, so that people that were on particularly low incomes could apply to the Labour Party to have financial bursaries and financial support. And one of the areas where you could get support with is around childcare in particular. And I'm really proud that the party's doing that, because I think that's a really big barrier for a lot of people. And we've got to challenge what leadership looks like. So when I stood in this election, I was about 6-7 months pregnant. Like I didn't want to hide it, but there definitely was no hiding it. I was spherical. And there were some people that, they didn't mean it in a bad way, but they kind of questioned, like, oh, is this a good time for you to be doing it? Of course it was a good time for me to be doing it. If anything, that little person inside my belly was making me more angry about the idea of growing up in a Conservative government and having Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Like, that really spurred me on. And it is about changing what leadership looks like. And I think we all have a role to play in that, whether it's in the media, about the language that we use, whether we're in the Commons and the way that we work, but also, I think as well, how we support other women. And that is crucial. And it's not just about asking her to stand. It's also about how we support somebody to stand. And I'm really proud that the party has got the bursaries for PPCs, and also for trade unions, to not just be financially backing candidates, but to also be offering training, individual support when it comes to, like, a website. I have no idea how to make a website. I never will do. But there are people there that will be willing to support you. And it's just about finding and identifying those people as well.
That's great, thank you. I agree with everything everyone said, and I think it's really important as well that we don't just support women when they're standing, but also once they're there as well. But I think the training is a really important point. So now it's time for the Q&As. Emily, do you want to ask the first question?
I think obviously there's been so much progress, as we've all picked up upon, in terms of gender representation in politics generally. But I would just be interested to hear, maybe from Frances' perspective, plus Sarah and Feryl's perspective, on, since you launched your 50-50, do you feel more hopeful now than you did, or less hopeful? Because sometimes I feel like there is a bit of complacency, that we think, oh, it's improving, so therefore we don't need to have such divided attention to it. I found sometimes, with the election last year, the fact that 51% of Labour's MPs were female was fantastic, but I really don't feel like that was celebrated enough as an achievement. And I feel like sometimes people just think, oh, progress is happening, so therefore I don't need to be really angry about it. And I think that's something that me and Amy both have in common, that we were sort of, no, this is still not good enough. I would just be interested to hear your thoughts on whether you think it's getting better, or you're still frustrated.
I'm extremely frustrated. I mean, when I first set up 50-50, I just thought everyone would agree. The idea that we have to persuade people that the majority of the population should be represented properly, we need to build a better democracy. And, as Feryal said, there are so many reasons women can't participate, money being a major one, parenting being a major one, but this affects many men too. If women cannot participate, there are many people that can't participate. When I started this campaign, only 23% of MPs were women. I mean, I just could not believe it was that bad. There were over 85 countries that were doing better than us. So sure, I mean, it's 32% now, but you know, women are still outnumbered 2 to 1, as I say. The progress just isn't quick enough. I mean, I find it incredible that women aren't more cross about this and more angry about this. Women's voices just aren't heard. I mean, they weren't heard in the Brexit argument. I mean, men dominated that discussion, that debate. That was a really important decision we were making, and men dominated it. Absolutely right. Men have dominated the COVID crisis, but actually it's women working on the front line. 90% of nurses are women. Their experience is relevant. And when it comes to, I mean, I watched Extinction last night with David Attenborough. I mean, you know, the world, we're at a crisis point, and it's a woman's world too. Of course, we need to be involved in solving the problems. And absolutely, the system is not fit for purpose. And it needs to be inclusive, and it needs to be properly inclusive of women so that it's inclusive of everybody. And we really need, so I mean, yeah, I feel we should be making a louder noise about this. Everyone got very excited in 2018 because it was, you know, the centenary. But more has to be done. And we really need to be, this is about building a better democracy. And it's not a party political issue, but it's fantastic that Labour are leading the way. And I think Labour should be proud of themselves for that. So I don't know if that answers your question. But as I say, it's the 4 R's. It's about representation, resources, responsibility, and respect. And that's why it matters.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. Sarah or Feryal, do you have any comments on that?
I just wanted to quickly add, just that, you know, we shouldn't be complacent because we will go backwards. If you look at the number of seats that we lost at the election just gone, majority of the seats that we lost in Labour were women. So yes, we're in a fantastic place where we've had a record number of women elected, but we need to make sure that we are, as you said, we are continuing to support women who are already there, who are elected, because we know that women also, it's easy for women also to lose seats as well, because they're targeted in a different way. So I think complacency is a danger, and I wholeheartedly second everything that Frances has said.
Thank you. And Sarah?
I think we can never afford to be complacent because we haven't got there yet, even though I think if you look at the numbers of MPs and the makeup for Labour, that's fantastic. But what about the advisors? What about everybody else around it? And the party function, the machine of politics, it's nowhere near it. But on a really positive note, Feryal and I came in 2019 with our 29 intake, and it's one of the most diverse intakes that we've ever had. Of course, I would have loved to have been in a much bigger intake, but the ones that we did get, they are incredibly diverse. We all have different experiences, but majority of our 26 are women. And I was really surprised actually, because when we first got elected, we'd been in our shared committee room instead of our offices, and I was used to just being around our new intake. And then when we went into the Commons together with all the others for the new intake, I found it really odd that I was just sat in front of a sea of white men. And my little happy 2019 bubble of our intake was completely shattered, and I can definitely see that there is no room for complacency at all. Definitely not.
Okay, great. I'm glad that we're all agreed on that. So another question I had was about the Labour Party specifically. As me and Amy often go on podcasts and write articles about, you know, the left and women's representation, we often come up against the question of, well, why hasn't Labour had a female leader? What is it about the Labour Party that sort of denies women the chance to be, you know, why aren't they accepted at the top level? Do you think that's a fair question, or what are your thoughts on women and leadership in the Labour Party?
I think it's a fair question until we get one, and until we get another one.
Yeah.
And it's not a comfortable position to be in at all. Not at all.
So, and you know, and there are some extremely talented, experienced women in the Labour Party. So I think it is disappointing that Labour hasn't yet had a female leader, definitely. But I don't think that's the whole point, actually. I think it's great that 51% of Labour MPs are women, and that it's better to sort of big that up. We need women on the back benches and the front benches. And you can't have talented women on the front benches if you're not creating the pipeline with them on the back benches. So I think Labour's gone about it in completely the right way. And so I think you need to congratulate yourselves and not let that deter you. But I think it is disappointing because there are some very talented female politicians in the Labour Party.
I agree, and I think it's really disappointing that we are not even closer to we're slightly closer this time with many more women standing in this leadership election. It is disappointing, but I think until we have a female, I know we've got the general secretary of TUC as a woman. Maybe if we had more general secretaries of unions as women, maybe that, you know, with union backing their candidates, maybe women will stand a better chance of be getting elected as the leader of the Labour Party. It is disappointing, whilst I think Keir's doing a fantastic job, it is really disappointing that we haven't yet had a female leader.
But I do have to say that the women that are on our front benches, and I think one of the things that we do need to remember is that we're not in a presidency. We are a team, and a shadow cabinet is a team. And you look at the strength of women that are in that shadow cabinet team: Lisa Nandy, Annalise Dodds, Rosanna. Like, it is Angela. She's going to be speaking tomorrow as well. She spoke today. Like, we are a very wealthy party when it comes to female talent. We should really celebrate that, but I don't think we should stop asking the question until we get one.
Absolutely.
I think that's so important. Sorry, by the way, I had some technical problems.
Welcome back.
I just wanted to ask, what specific policies do you think could be implemented that would really address this issue, both in encouraging women to stand and supporting them in that, but also once they're there, either to support them in doing their actual roles or in challenging abuse or maybe like the pervasive patriarchal culture?
Who's starting?
Sorry, whoever wants to go first.
I find as I said, this is true of every layer of government, whether it's local or national government. I think the support to women in terms of childcare is incredibly important. I don't have any children, but look at my friends who do, look at other MPs who do. It's incredibly prohibiting. I think it was a real surprise that Stella Creasy, who recently had the child, got replacement to support to do the work that she was doing, and it was seen as a really odd thing to do. And I think it's really, really important if you want to continue to, you need to have good support mechanisms for women to once they're in Parliament. I think that would be the same thing in local government as well. And I think we also need to possibly look at, I know everyone cringes at it, but the possibility of job share. I mean, why not? We do have the opportunity of job sharing in every other, profession in life. You can do it as a doctor. You can do it as a lawyer. You can do it in any other profession. Why not as an MP? I think that's a policy that I know lots of people cringe at, but it's one that should definitely be explored if we want to continue to encourage more women and keep more women in Parliament. That's for me now. I'll let others take it.
Yeah, I think there is a pervasive patriarchal structure, but that doesn't just exist in Westminster. It comes down to our attitude to parenting and where parenting responsibilities fall. And it strikes me, on the whole, it takes two to tango, and it takes two to make a baby. And actually, men need to stand up, and we need to design our parenting systems to ensure that men are equally involved and held equally responsible when it comes to raising children. So, for example, in the Scandinavian countries, I think particularly Norway, where of course they have a gender balanced parliament. So people don't talk about maternity leave; they talk about parenting leave, and men get just as involved in raising kids as women do. And the result is that their family relationships, their personal relationships, are enhanced. But it means that women don't have to go round with this, the parenting penalty on their shoulder when they're in their sort of mid to late 20s. And that all the pleasures and penalties of parenting fall equally to both mothers and fathers. But actually, when it comes to Westminster as well, I guess, being a slightly older woman, I think it's really important that we respect women's experience, and that older women have a lot to give, and it's very important that they're not sidelined. It's a massive game of musical chairs, this political game, and very often, women have been doing a lot of unpaid work, but just because it's unpaid doesn't make it unimportant. And just because women have been raising kids, this is just as important work as running a company. I mean, in fact, if you measure the contribution of the unpaid economy, it is massive. So I think we really, as women, we need to basically draw upon all our experience and big it up and be proud of the contribution that we've made, even if it's not seen as an economic contribution. Unpaid work is just as important as paid work, and caring responsibilities are crucial if you're going to have a well-balanced, sane society. So women need to be prouder about the work that they do. And when it comes to standing, older women need to be proud, if the reason they haven't been able to get involved before, because we live in a patriarchal society and all the child rearing has fallen to them, they need to be proud about the fact that they have done that, and that is a worthwhile occupation. That's my opinion anyway. But going forward, frankly, for younger women, what we need to be trying to build is a society where parenting is a joint responsibility and isn't perceived as something that falls to women, in my opinion.
Just picking up on the maternity and the flexibility point, although we've just started to see maternity in local government, there really isn't maternity in Parliament. So I had my baby beginning of February. I had 6 months proxy, which that just means that somebody else can vote for me, which is fantastic. And thank you very much, Kate and Alex. You did a great job being my proxies. But the work doesn't stop. And there wasn't the flexibility around that you would get, I think, returning back to work. And I was very lucky in the fact that I have a very supportive partner. He is going to be taking a year's career break, and he will be the main carer for our baby. I don't know how we would be working as a team if that wasn't necessarily the case. And that's not the way that I think Parliament should work, or MPs should have to make a choice that one person is going to be the main carer, because as Francis has said, parents then lose out. Whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, whether it's a same-sex partnership, people are missing out. And that's not necessarily, I think, the healthiest environment for the people that have, I think, quite a big responsibility in shaping the country. But the second point I wanted to talk about was, I think all women shortlists have been fantastic, but I also think they're a blunt tool. And this goes to my point about how we challenge what leadership looks like and what people think leadership is and what good leadership is. And that, I think, will need a culture change. It's not just a culture change in the party, it's nationally. And I mean, I'll just take an example. I was working in local government. I was working for a woman leader of a Labour group, and there was also a woman leader of the council, a Conservative. And I phoned up the local paper. I was incredibly angry with the headline that they'd had, which was about the budget debate the night before. And it was councillors in cat fight. And having to explain to a male journalist why that was a really inappropriate headline. Eventually, when I said to him, would you have said that about 2 male councillors? And he said, no. And I said, well, why would you say that about 2 women? And it is changing the whole narrative. And one of the things I think we can do, and we've all done, is unconscious bias training. We also did training as MPs. And I think all Westminster staff now, is it Feryal, that have to do training. And I think that as a party, I think our membership should also take some responsibility as well and be able to do some of that training and really challenge ourselves, because it challenged me in some of the unconscious bias training in particular, that what we see as leadership and what we see as good leadership, because there are very, very different ways of looking at what a good leader is. And I think that our society has quite a traditional view of it still, and we're missing out. Not just women, we as an entire nation are really missing out on talent and a different way of doing things. Jacob Rees-Mogg is not a tradition I want to stick with, thank you, because that means that we've got, as Feryal said, like we are queuing to walk through a corridor to put our buzzer on. Like, I actually had to explain to my mum this, and she was like, this doesn't make sense. And I said, no, it doesn't make sense, and I can't justify it to you. She was like, but didn't you guys have like a way of doing it on your laptop? And I said, yes. And she said, so your last meeting was what, like 7, 8 o'clock at night, but you're waiting another 2 hours. You can't go into the chamber. Yeah. So she said, so you've missed seeing Izzy before she goes to bed, because a man wants you to walk through a corridor and put your pass on an e-reader. And I was like, that's exactly it. And she said, well, it doesn't make any sense, and then swore. And there's nothing more I could say to her. But that is the system that we are working in. And it's not just unfair to women. It's also really not democratic, because it's not just women, it's also disabled people, anybody who's shielding, anybody who's vulnerable at the moment that is missing out. Things could be done a lot better and a lot more efficiently.
I have to absolutely agree with you, Sarah. And, this again is what this COVID crisis has demonstrated, that there are technological solutions to these things. And we could build a better democracy if we access the technological opportunities. It means that, in fact, MPs could be closer to their constituents. And for us in 50-50 Parliament, we're breaking the Westminster bubble now. We can talk to hundreds of women throughout the UK because we've all got used to using Zoom. The idea that you should have to, like sheep, walk through a gate when there's the possibility of, using bio recognition. It's just crazy. And I think there was something called Rethink, wasn't there, on the BBC after this crisis. We should be rethinking democracy and using these technological opportunities to get people more involved in the decision making and feeling that their voices really can be heard.
I just wanted to, Emily also mentioned in her question the issue around online harassment of women, which is, it is an issue, and it's growing, and we need to call it out. When you look at social media, whether, you know, this is across all parties, it's predominantly women, female MPs who are bearing the brunt of the, you know, of trolls and really abusive language. So we need to, you know, that is a problem. We do need to call it out, because in some cases, you know, I read some of the comments that some of my colleagues received when I went into politics. They are terrifying. They are incredibly scary. If you know, I've been in politics for 15 years and 16 years actively in politics. For someone who's joining, if I, you know, early when I first took an interest in politics, if I was to see that sort of aggressive misogyny, it would have scared me off. And we just need to, but it is being called out by a lot of women. We just need to make sure that it's not tolerated, and it's called out whenever it happens, you know, across the board for every woman in every party.
Wow,
completely agree with that. And absolutely, it's about supporting each other in a cross-party way.
Definitely. We could talk about these sort of issues for hours and hours, I'm sure, but we're actually running a bit over time, so unfortunately I just have to wrap up and say thank you so much to our amazing panelists for joining us. It was a really lively and worthwhile discussion, and thanks for the support for the Young Fabians. This will be uploaded onto the Young Fabian YouTube channel, so you can watch it on there or share after. It'll be uploaded later today, but thank you all for joining us, and have a lovely weekend.
Thank you for hosting us.
Take care.
Emily, really nice to meet you, Sarah and Feryal.
Lovely to
Take
meet
care,
you too,
Frances.
Frances.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Sarah.